Hello, happy Pride, because it is June 1st. I am very tired. I had a very long day at work. I got home from work at about 9:15-ish. It is also very hot. I made myself iced tea, even though this is a mug. This is like the one mug that I own. It is very warm. I feel like I'm melting. It's like 70 something degrees here in my room, and I had like fans going and it helped cool it down, but still hot. So today, since it is June 1st, that means that the results for the Booktube Prize are out, which is very exciting. The results for the quarterfinals are out, so I figured that I would talk to you about the books that I read. So I believe I was in Group D. It'll say somewhere on the video title what group I was specifically in. I just forgot to write it down. Booktube Prize is run by Robert over at Barter Hordes. And it's a fun thing that I like to do. So I am going to rank these books from 6 to 1. 6 being the lowest, so the least good, and 1 being the one that I thought was best. And for these books, I had a fairly good time, or a fairly easy time, picking out my top 3, and I knew where my last one was. The rest, everything in between, was a little bit iffy. Yeah, let's start from position 6. For this one, I put Dinners with Ruth. This is by Nina Totenberg. I think the subtitle is like notes on like friendships. And I wanted to love this book because it was about RBG, and I love RBG. Fun fact, in my classroom, instead of saying like red, green, blue, so or red, blue, green, which is like the colors for like pixels, because it would be RGB, I usually do RBG. I'm like, yeah, it's RBG. So she lives on in my classroom in that way. Anyway, that's a tangent. So I was really excited to read this book, and I come to read about it, and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be like cool. Maybe like we're gonna learn about Ruth Bader Ginsburg from the perspective of her friends. And I think that the reason why this book fell short is how it was marketed. I feel like this book was marketed as like a very like, oh, you're gonna learn about RBG. And I feel like you do learn some about RBG through like her relationship with the author, but I really was not interested at all at like the author's actual life, and because it's really more of a memoir about the author, and she does really focus on like how friendships have impacted her life, and it's all well and good. I just didn't really care. I found it to be a hard time caring, and sometimes I would get into it, and sometimes I'd be like, yeah, no, I just don't care. I was really far more interested in reading about RBG than I was about Totenberg. Some of the parts were interesting, like the parts that like stick out to me the most were the parts where she talked about what it was like in early journalism, and being a journalist being sometimes the only female journalist, and the switch from women just taking all of the aggressions and microaggressions and then to that not being okay. That I found to be an interesting and compelling, but just about everything else, I did not care about her romances with her husbands. I just don't care. So that's why that one I put last. And I was sad to put that one last because I had high hopes. The next one I put as number 5 was How to Stand Up to a Dictator. This is by Maria Ressa. I actually really enjoyed this book, and I would highly recommend it, and I think it's a really important book to be published right now, given the rise in AI that we have been seeing, because you really see the problems that come with like social media and how it is so hard to fight back against misinformation, and how like we need to actually have some regulations on this and some ways to control it. And now that we have things like generative AI, that's just going to make the issue significantly worse. More tea. So that I found really, really relevant and topical. But the reason why I put this one fifth is that it's kind of divided into two books, which they're not really two books, they're just two sections that I felt like one section was unnecessary. The first section is kind of more of a memoir about Maria Reza's like life and childhood and how she left the Philippines and then came back to the Philippines and like being queer and stuff like that, and how she got into journalism. And the second part focuses more on her fight to fight back against dictators in the Philippines and against not hate crimes but misinformation, which that second part I found to be very compelling and very necessary reading. It's just the first part where the first couple of chapters, especially when you're in her childhood, I was just like, why am I reading this? Why do I care? And while it is like interesting, I felt that there could have been other ways to integrate that into the writing of this book that didn't kind of make you slog through the first couple of chapters before you get to the really interesting things that happen in the latter part of the book. So that's kind of where it fell apart or fell through. That was just kind of my feelings about that book. The book I ranked fourth, I said An Immense World by Ed Yong, and I thought this was really well written. I just kind of was sitting here and I'm like, what is the larger point to this story or this what we are gallivanting around? And I just, it's not that I didn't care, it just was like, there's, in comparison with the other books that are in this, where it felt like they were all trying to do something, I felt like this, The Immense World, wasn't necessarily trying, like it was trying to do something, but not to the level as some of the other ones. For that, I kind of bumped it down, and plus I think it's just long in a way that I don't think it needs to be. I forget how the book, it's just long. I mean, I don't think it needs to be. Maybe I would have enjoyed ingesting the material through more of like a podcast, or yeah, I think the structure works really well in terms of like you gallivanting through the senses. The transitions between the chapters I liked and hated at the same time, because he does this thing where he like will be talking about like the chapter that you're finishing will be about like eyesight, and he will do like some sort of transition to that will allude to the next sense, and I can't remember any off the top of my head. And in theory, I liked that, but it just got to be repetitive and annoying by the end of the book. And it's not that he uses the exact same phrasing every single time, but it was just like, oh, okay, here's the transition to like the next chapter. It felt very like hand-holdy, especially towards the end of the book. So I don't know, a love-hate relationship with that in terms of like the actual quality like of the writing. But beyond that, like I thought it was like interesting. I thought it was cool. It didn't grip me the way that other books grip me, and that is why I felt the way I did. The next book that I chose is for the third spot for the book that I want to be going on to the next round, and that is Paradise Falls. And that is by Keith O'Brien. And this talks about an environmental disaster where basically you have a company burying chemicals in this New York New York State suburb, and lots of people died and developed cancer, and children especially. And it's just a heartbreaking story, especially when you are listening to like the mothers and how they tried to fight so hard for their children. They did everything that they possibly could. They were just not listened to over and over and over and over again. And it kind of like ends on a happy note, but also doesn't, because you're just left being like, this is, or at least how I was left feeling with this about it was, this is capitalist America, and what is going to stop the next company from doing the exact same thing to the environment and to people, underprivileged people. So for me, it just was very a very sense of like heaviness to it at the end. And the reason why I put it like kind of lower is that it just hasn't stuck in my brain the way that the other two books that I ranked higher of it has. And honestly, when I was ranking the top three, I was like, I want these to move on. I'm not going to be too picky about what the exact order is. So the next book that I read is We Don't Know Ourselves. This is by Fintan O'Toole. This book is very interesting. I've tried to describe it to other people, and it's just one of those things where you have to experience it, because it's not a biography, it's not a memoir, it's like a biography of like a place and time, and that is like Ireland in the basically the 20th century. I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I left the book hating or loving Ireland. I definitely felt like it was a place that I would not want to live, because my rights as a human won't be respected there, especially because of such of the stranglehold hold that the Catholic Church has on Northern Ireland, or has on Ireland in general, and that the Catholic Church just period is not a safe place for me. Many religious spaces are not, which is all. It's not a separate issue. That's just a fact of me existing in this world. But this like was very interesting because it painted. So this is where like the author grew up. It painted Ireland in I think a very honest light. It didn't shy away from the very dark underbelly of what it was like in Ireland, but it also was just like, I loved Ireland. I love Ireland. It felt very good to see those moments of joy, so, the good parts of a place that I don't think I will ever want to live in, and how it just was also very like insidious the way that the Catholic Church is able to hold power for so long, and the consequences that has on a community. Like, there wasn't a dedicated chapter, but it was kind of like the whole book. It was talked about the abuse that priests do, and how it was very like normalized, that it was very like everyone had a story, or everyone knew somebody who had a story, and it was a very like quiet secret that these priests were molesting children, and that no one really did anything. And like the author doesn't like make it like, the author like describes it as like something that was horrible, and that is horrible, that is glad that like that was a problem, but it just was interesting like how sort of like cavalier the author was, because the author does share his own experience being molested as a small child by a priest, and his own attitude kind of towards it was very much like, oh, it was just like one incident this one time and it wasn't even that bad. And I was just like, you were touched inappropriately by an authority figure and no one did anything to protect you or to protect the other vulnerable members. And you just have this issue like all of the time. And it talked, abortion was a huge topic in this book. And it was very interesting, because I liked, the one thing that I did like about it was you know, that most Irish people had the stance of like abortion is not okay because of the Catholic Church, right? It goes back to the whole Catholic Church thing. But he was also like, most of us though probably would help a friend who got pregnant and didn't want to have the baby, and no one would bat an eye when they would hear about, you know, somebody like going to England to have an abortion and come back. And then he tells the story of this time where they were, so it was kind of like a very hypocritical like attitude, where it's kind of like, oh, we're gonna say this publicly but then do something completely different behind closed doors that have, you know, that are translucent and can be seen through, so everyone knows everybody's business. He tells the story of this young girl who is raped and whose parents don't let her have an abortion, so she has to actually deliver the child, and how horrific that was for the child, and how everybody was horrified in this town that the parents didn't actually let the child have an abortion because the child was raped and everything like that. And she was like really young as well. Like it was statutory rape, which again, like all of the consequences of this fell squarely not on the person responsible, not on the perpetrator of the crime, but the actual like the victim. And that's, yeah, so it was a very like interesting like attitude where it was like, oh, it's like it's a very compelling book. I found it very, very intriguing. And yeah, would not want to live in Ireland. Jesus fucking Christ. I did really enjoy it. So like it does talk about like the Troubles, but that's not like the main focus of the book. Like every time I talk to somebody about this book, they all think it's like about the Troubles, and I'm like, it's a part of the book, but not the main focus. It's really like a biography of a time in a certain... The one that I ranked top through process of elimination would be His Name is George Floyd. This is by Robert Samuels and Toulouse Orenpina. This was just so moving. It was so emotional. When you read the parts where Floyd is murdered, that was, I don't know, I had to like stop and just like, yeah, I just had to stop because it was just hard to read. It's a very, very good book. So this book is, you know, it's like a biography of George Floyd, and I think it does a really good job of showing how racism, how these systems of oppression that you can learn about and read about and understand on like a certain like conceptual level affects one person's life. And it goes beyond when Floyd dies. It talks about the struggle for justice, and you just leave the book incensed and upset, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was... And I read this fairly early on, so almost, I want to say definitely more than 6 weeks ago. I don't remember if it was the first one I read, but it was one of the first ones that I read for this, and it was very compelling, and it was very moving, and I would suggest anyone read this. Yeah, it was very, very, very emotional. Trying to think of like what to... You just read it. Yeah, maybe we think about cycles of violence, cycles of oppression, and how baked in, and how, you know, someone who's like myself, you know, a white person, I just do not have to deal with that fear on a day-to-day like level about being just pulled over by the cops. And it's just, yeah, it is a very... It's a very good read. It has very interesting conversations as well about interrelational like relationships, and how, because at the time of Floyd's passing, his girlfriend is white. You hear a lot from her and her experience like dealing with his passing. I'm going to end it here so that I can turn the air conditioning. Have a lovely week. Let me know if you read any of these books, which one you would have ranked first and which one you would have ranked last. And have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye-bye.